Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we celebrate story. We are obsessed with creativity and talking to interesting people to find out what makes them tick. I'm Sean Murphy, your host. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University. I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. You can find out more about me at seanmurphy.net. But what I enjoy most about the different roles I play is I get an opportunity to hang out with people cooler than me and learn from them and be inspired by them. Today is not only no exception, we're getting two for the price of one. So I could not be more thrilled to welcome Bill Miller and Leeya Mehta to Some Things Considered. Let me introduce them both and then we'll jump in. Ladies first, Leeya is the director of the Alan Cheuse International Writers Center at George Mason University. In November of 2024, she received the Faculty Civic Excellence Award. She is a prize-winning poet, fiction writer, and essayist. Her work has been anthologized, and her poetry collections are The Towers of Silence and A Story of the World Before the Fence. You can find out much more at leeyamehta.com, and I'll put all this information, as always, in the write-up so you can easily link to it. And right above her on the Brady Bunch screen is William Miller, who people that are lucky enough to know him call him Bill. Bill directed the creative writing program at George Mason University for more than 24 years until his retirement in 2018. During that time, he helped establish the Cheuse Center, the Fall for the Book Literary Festival, the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree program in creative writing, and Stillhouse Press. In addition, he serves on the board for Fall for the Book and is the current board chair of the Cheuse Center. Leeya, Bill, thank you so much for being here. I've really been looking forward to talking to you and mostly letting you celebrate the 10th anniversary, which is upcoming, of the Cheuse Center. I want people to come away from this conversation knowing what it is you do, who you are, and why they should support. So maybe the best opening question would be for each of you to talk about, how did you come to be involved? How did the Cheuse Center come to be? What's happening now? What are you excited about? And then I've got a million other questions.
Okay, well, that's a great introduction, and thank you for having us. I appreciate very much this opportunity, Sean. You did say you liked hanging out with people who are cooler than you, and of course, there's nobody cooler than you. So right there, you're not going to that's not going to work. But the Cheuse Center, even before it was named the Cheuse Center, was my idea. I thought as I was directing the creative writing program long about 2014 or so, that this was something we needed, that we needed a way to connect the creative writing program to the international stage, the international scene, that we needed to be not so insular, not so much like so many creative writing programs, and I mean this in no critical way, but I was just looking at ways to differentiate the Mason program from all the other 218 that were in the country. And one of the ways I saw to do that was to take down the barriers, the fences that sort of kept us from being part of the world. I get that there's a lot of benefit in coming to a residential creative writing program like Mason's or the other 217 or 18 that there were at the time, and wrapping yourself in the good feeling in the community of like-minded people who want to improve their craft. But then you have to also look beyond that moment in a writer's development and a writer's life. And you have to equip them with the kind of experiences and the kind of benefits and the kind of mind and, if you will, soul-stretching experiences that will get them beyond that present moment and carry them for some number of years. Because in all likelihood, the statistics show an emerging writer, a newly minted MFA writer, isn't going to publish day one or two or three or four. And so you gotta have something to connect with. And so in thinking about all these things and beginning to have conversations with Alan Cheuse about this need, talking with him, and Alan called me more than all the other faculty. He would drop by the office. He loved to call me up and ask me what I was doing. And we had several phone conversations. I thought we had some emails where we went back and forth about it, because we were always shooting emails back and forth as well. If text had been the thing at the time, we probably would have had more text. But I remember very distinctly that one of the things he said that we really, if we were going to do this, we had to strive for, was offering the Mason creative writing students the opportunity to travel international. Because he said so many of the students he was working with in the classroom as a faculty member hadn't had that experience. And that this was a thing that he felt like we needed, that this was a benefit. Well, that reinforced my idea. And of course, Alan had a car wreck in California. He died, and we hadn't yet formed it. We were in the throes of forming it that summer, and then we began to think about a name for it. And I went to see Chris O'Shea, his widow, and I said, Chris, I want to name it for Alan, because he and I had these conversations, and he bought into this part. And of course, Alan was a traveler. His father was a Russian immigrant who basically escaped he actually came from Ukraine, but he was flying a plane, and he ditched basically in the ocean and then got himself to the U.S. And Alan sort of embraced that aspect of his heritage, and he and Chris traveled broadly, and he was a big fan of it. I love being in a place. I don't like going to get there. Just ask my wife; she'll tell you. But it was a great idea to name it for Alan, and it was a real kind of moment where Chris and I and my wife, who happened to be with me at the moment, sat on the breeze stirred porch at her house in DC and talked about Alan, and talked about my conversations, and talked about naming it for him. And I'm so glad we did. I can't think of anything that would have been more appropriate. No, can't think of anything that would have been more appropriate. It was just great. And one of the cornerstones of what we have done as we are nearing the 10th year since its founding is to send budding scholars and writers abroad. We have benefited tremendously from an anonymous donor who has each year put up some money so that we've been able to award travel grants to these students. They go through a very elaborate process of looking up what's the travel cost, how long is it going to take, where am I going, what exactly am I going to get out of it, and writing a very detailed proposal. I mean, this isn't whimsy. Alan would have loved it if we could have said whimsically, go, travel, see the world, read as much as you can, write as much as you can, love as much as you can. See, he would have loved that. But unfortunately, we can't do that. That's no way to run things when you're giving away other people's money. So we run it a little bit differently, a little bit better organized. But we have done that for about 9 years now. There have been classes of these students who've gone. And back in March, one of those students published a first novel that came purely and simply from his ability to travel with the Cheuse Travel Grant. It was The Life and Death of August Sweeney. Sam Ashworth was the writer, is the writer, no past tense, he is the writer. And it's an epic, San Francisco Writers Project put the book out, and in their publicity, they called it an epic novel. It's 308 pages. And I said to Sam when the book was coming out, This is an epic novel in 308 pages. How do you do that? Why isn't it 608 pages? And he told me how many words the editor wanted him to cut out and thin the manuscript down. But it is absolutely wonderful. And other writers have other publishing projects that came out of their travel. I just wanted to cite Sam. It's recent. It's fresh in my mind because it is recent. But it's a prime example of the kind of success that we have kind of helped make. And it makes me very feels makes me feel very good. And if I could tell Alan about it, I know he'd feel good about it too. I'm sorry, Leeya. I have gone on far longer than I intended to. I think I'd like for you to come in and pick up there about the travel fellowships and the rest of what we're doing. This let me just, by way of a bridge, let me just say that this sending American writers abroad is like 1/3 of what we have solidified and codified as the Cheuse Center mission.
Yeah, that's right. And in the case of Sam Ashworth, he was the first Cheuse Fellow to go. And the first year in 2017, we had two fellows go, and Liesl Hamilton is the other who will then, who is on the verge of having a publication as well. And subsequently, we have Mason um, faculty like Carol Mitchell, who were one of the early fellows who now have a novel out. Carol has a novel out as well, and she's on our board. We just invited her to join. And so part of the idea for a person like me who never met Alan Cheuse is to embody his vision and Bill's vision and to stay very close to that original sort of sense of the cosmopolitan human being, the human being who's sort of not just the writer, but also the reader, who's using books to find ways to establish and generate sort of a generative process into one's own humanity and to move not just from the sort of the lonely pastime of writing or reading, but then into public life and develop a deeper commitment to conversation, to the art of living a more deeply meaningful life. And so the MFA was one part of Alan's vision, but Alan also taught undergraduates and taught others. And one of the things that I learned in the course of the first year I started as the director at Mason in 2022 was that the undergraduates were also this vast country of people, and each of them, like James Baldwin talks about, how we have a country within us. And so trying to kind of link this experience of being human, even if you've been nowhere, um, even if you're 18 or 19 years old, and link it to this wilderness that you're beginning to find your way through as a reader. And so one of the things that we have done very consciously in the course of the last couple of years is to bring these undergraduates alongside these MFA students who are really in um, a much more well, a divine spot to be able to sit and write for 3 years in such an incredible environment, um, and almost like a writing lab for 3 years at Mason, and take the undergraduates, the graduates, the faculty who are producing new work and who are in conversation with all of these different student bodies, and then writers from DC and the region, and then writers from abroad, and bring all of them into the same space at times. So, for example, we had an exhibition by I said Sam Ashworth, by Morgan Ashcombe, who's a Charlottesville-based visual media guy who makes books, and he's an incredible artist. And so recently, we we had writers from the U.S. who are one of them was Israeli American, another was Ukrainian come together to read with Morgan's work around them in conversation. And so you've got someone who's from grew up on a dirt road in Virginia, who comes to George Mason as an undergrad, goes on to have a storied career in art, um, be the backdrop for a Ukrainian artist, and then and poet, and a Israeli novelist. A couple of years ago, we had a Syrian writer who is also a calligraphist, who's a writer and artist at risk, who was brought to Mason, who had an exhibition, and we had a number of incredible Palestinian and Arab American writers read their work in with that around that space with faculty, with students. So the idea is to create that community with touch points across America, within America, and then outside. And so that's the sort of the second part of what we do, is coming up thematically with ideas that anchor us into our own humanity and broaden our collaboration with one another. And thematically, we produced 18 months now which was supposed to be 13 months, but it turned out to be even longer, of the Baldwin 100, which is the centennial of James Baldwin. And for most people who heard we're an international writers center, they were like, well, why are you doing James Baldwin? And because we are interested in American writers who feel deeply American, but who want to leave America to see America from outside. And that was part of what I think Alan was trying to do when he was when, with the conversation between Bill and Alan was around that. And so even anchoring Alan's own experience of traveling to Ukraine became part of our anchoring to the Ukraine crisis and the war in Ukraine right now. So over the last 2.5 years, we've done multiple programs on Ukrainian writers, whilst also doing one program through Zoom with Kyiv at the Kyiv Literary Festival. And I read from Alan's memoir, which he wrote about going back with his son to see where his father was born and where he came from in the suburban sort of villages of Kyiv. And so that was sort of the second thing. We have these different pillars, but um, um, Bill was saying we do many things, and so that's another one of the. But in addition to that, some of the pillars of what we do are related to language and how language is both used and misused, and the theme for our current year, which will be moving to a new year, we'll be moving to a new year soon, has been the language of politics and the politics of language. And so within that is also the politics of translation and the art of translation, and who wants to speak what language depending on the power dynamics, not just in geopolitics, but otherwise. So, Ukrainian poets have learned Ukrainian for writing more and for speaking more in the last 10 years than they did before that. Ukrainian was always there, but it wasn't being used in the same way that Russian was being used as the lingua franca. And so how writers are relearning their languages and using them to establish where they stand politically has been part of the learning process. And so we've had Russian writers come, we've had Ukrainian writers come, and about 50 programs in the last 18 months with people from, multiple different countries and affiliations. But I think one of the original things about the Cheuse Center was that we wanted to work on translation and in translation and create an audience for translation so that we were learning about these other cultures in that way. Yeah, but I'll pause here for a second. in case you want to jump in with some questions.
Well, so first of all, you both, I mean, you beautifully articulate so much of the history and the mission. For a little bit further context, I'll just say, I have an interesting relationship as a proud alma mater of George Mason, as a former pupil of Bill Miller. Don't hold that against him. I've always been a fan. I loved what Bill cultivated during his time there. And when the center started, in my own not so humble opinion, for all the reasons you both have articulated, it was just a slam dunk and a wonderful idea. But I also think it was very prescient, and it was addressing what I was hearing more and more of in, both in smaller micro communities and in the wider press, which was, do we need MFAs anymore? Aren't these just very insular and very exclusive, and they all sound alike? And there's some validity, of course, to those critiques. What the Cheuse Center helped really blow into space was what Bill was already establishing at Mason, in my opinion, which was looking outward and not letting an identity of, this is what we do here and this is our mission, and kind of putting up false barriers. It was this very outward looking, very worldly, very international flavor in terms of the students, in terms of the books that were coming out. But I think it just obliterated any cliches or critiques of how universities in general and MFAs in particular were becoming a little more identical. And now Mason and the Cheuse Center stand so apart from that. And it just makes so much sense being so close to DC. And of course, we're in a political time where these issues have never been more relevant. So, lest anyone that's tuning in right now that is hearing about this for the first time, this is not really a response to current, right? As you both have said, it's been happening for 10 years, but it really anticipated a much deeper need. I mean, it's filling creative, educational, spiritual needs, but it really is addressing in a responsible and proactive way the world reality that some of us try to and colleges traditionally have shielded themselves from, and Cheuse Center looks at that straight on and allows people's worlds to expand accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that in a sense we're not a political organization. We don't do, any kind of virtue signaling. We're spending so much time on one-on-one conversations with students and with writers, trying to curate at the very grassroots of curation what is important and what needs to come through, and to give space and breathing space for softening of language and of ideas so that people are leaning in and wanting to hear, because if they stand back, they can't really hear because it's softer, the conversation. And then at the same time, wanting to speak and wanting to interact. And um, it has been it has been really great to see how um, whether it's in the smaller home salons that we do and in the lecture that we have every year. So we have a lecture of ideas every year, and it's around the theme of the year, but it's also fundamentally finding a way to create that public civic life in conversation. So this year's lecture of ideas is by Dino Mengistu, who's an Ethiopian American writer, and it's on courage and masculinity. So at a time when we're talking about masculinity in certain ways, to say, well, maybe we don't need to only talk about masculinity in negative terms. Maybe we can talk about it in positive terms. We can turn it into something that is more of a conversation rather than a shutting down, so that we are all leaning forward and having this conversation with one another. But at every stage, the vision of Bill is sort of participatory. And so nothing is done on its own. Though each of us has a lot of freedom, we also are always texting, always calling, always trying to make sure that we're listening for each other. If Bill says, "Oh, go listen to so and so at Politics and Prose," I think he'd be a great idea for the Choose lecture. We're rushing off to see it no matter what because we trust each other so much and we're so engaged in the prosperity of what Azar Nafisi calls the Republic of the Imagination. And she was our first Choose lecturer. And that was the lecture, was the Republic of Imagination. And that doesn't only happen in a public way, it always happens in smaller conversations as well.
Just to jump in, I think the Cheuse Center really sort of embodies what the writer of today is and to my perspective needs to be, which is a citizen of the world, a citizen of the US, as well as a citizen of her or his own imagination, giving to the world, but also engaging with the world. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the Cheuse Center, and one of the things that we're doing that I think not only differentiates the Mason Creative Writing Program, but also is singular in terms of what the Cheuse Center is offering to the community. We do public events so that we have the public facing things like the lecture, like visiting writer, people coming into the community. We're starting a program where we're trying to engage with international writers, have them write opinion pieces that we edit, polish, whatever is necessary there. But then we basically play the agent. We send them around and try to get them published so that we have that we become a kind of a megaphone, if you will, for people who have diverse experiences in all kinds of settings. And we're just launching this project, but I'm very excited about it because I think this is something we can do and become that kind of, well, a megaphone's not a bad metaphor for it, where we're actually trying to help spread international understanding and international knowledge, and through the written word, international experience. But then we also work with the students on campus, and we also encourage the students, to the degree we can, to get out and look at the larger world. It's
Yeah.
complex, and it's not getting any easier, this world that we're in. But I do think that we're here. We are in this world. We can't change that. All we can do is try to understand it and work within it.
And yeah, that one of the things that you're talking about the students, and before we started, we had a little bit of a conversation about living in Winchester, where you were at one point, Sean, and my family moved from India, my mother and I, in the 2000s, but she lives in Southern Virginia in Pulaski County, which is also very rural. And the subject of it's one of the poorest counties in America, Pulaski County. And one of the subjects that has come up a great deal is around inequality and the cost of education and things like that. And every day in the classroom, you hear from students who are, I have one student who's a military daughter, and she gets up at 4 in the morning and goes to Denny's and works in the morning shift. And then she's a first year, she's at Mason, and she's 18 years old, and she has this solid job every morning, and then she's paying her way through college. And so some of the things that seem, you read in the news or you see around you are happening to the students in the classroom, and they are struggling with debt. We've had students who have have exceptional promise, who have such exceptionally hard lives with debt. And so how do we again soften the conversation to be able to talk about these things there's that they're going through, and to reinforce that people are listening and that they are being heard and that there are stories out there that almost mirror their own. And so one of the early writers we had in 2022 was Leeya Mehta, who wrote a novel about um, a working class family, three generations of women, very young mothers, a grandmother, a daughter, and a granddaughter. And she has a line in it that says, "You need money even to protest." The idea that you can take off from your whatever it is you're doing to go out and protest. And it's set during the Women's March in Spain. And the novel won a famous award. And so Elena was our writer in residence that year from Spain. And so that kind of thing really, sort of makes the American student who's seeing similar, struggles, um, sit up and think, oh, I'm not that different, that their lives are not that different from ours. Um, and and so there's a conversation that comes out of it. But there's also the opportunity to anchor us into a common purpose in a sense. And so for the 10th anniversary, one of the things that we've been talking about is the theme of a complete life, of purpose, of passion, of spirituality, and then intimacy. And intimacy with family, and some of us don't have family, then with friends, with loved ones, with our dogs, with our books, of course, our cats. Um, so how do we, reestablish our humanity too and have that conversation? So we're sort of trying to put those ideas out there so that we're not following with the idea, the ideas, but also curating so that in the public spaces, we're feeling this optimism for one another and for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you both are talking about, it's obviously an expansion on the core mission. But what I'm hearing and loving is we're ultimately talking about the intersection of craft, whether it's from the writing or student perspective. It's the notion of community, which writers should be encouraged to join or recognize that they're going to be part of a community at some point, and then kind of a literary citizenship and civic engagement. And my 2 cents would be that these things are great in and of themselves, but as Bill, I'm sure, would agree, they make for better writers, they make for better educators, and there is this inevitable reinforcement mechanism of community building spreads awareness and empathy and the opportunities you talk about, Leeya, for people to understand. I mean, that's what we tell stories for, right? To expand our understanding of what's happening. And again, as we could elaborate on at length, as much progress as we think or hope we're making in America, we're constantly reminded that very similar stories need to be told and reinforced and maybe told better. But the more diverse stories we hear, the better appreciation we have of what we're capable of, and maybe some history we don't want to necessarily repeat. But I would love you too, if you care to expand on how the Cheuse Center is working, and whatever challenges or opportunities there are in terms of community building and strengthening both the student experience, the MFA experience, and the broader experience within the community, both for support and engagement.
One of the things that comes to mind listening to you, Sean, is the lecture that we've done now 3 times. Danal Mengistu, the Ethiopian writer that Leeya mentioned earlier, his works really focus a lot thematically on how people treat each other and how the way people treat each other enforces and reinforces the way we see ourselves. In his third novel, he's published 4. In his third novel, All Our Names, it vibrates back and forth. He's a great writer, but this one vibrates back and forth between a romance that's building in America with a transplanted African man and his caseworker in the US as he's trying to get settled in. The other half is his participation in a revolution in Africa. And there, in that revolution, people are killing each other. And a white man says to him, "Where did you learn to kill each other so effectively and with so much passion. And he said, we learned it from being subjugated by white Europeans. I think that that kind of storytelling comes not just from a kind of experience of the self, but it comes from an empathetic existence and understanding and an ability to sit within the self and look out
Yeah.
and to see not just the self in the world, but the world rippling on and on and on beyond the self. He's also, in his last novel, Someone Like Us, he's got a moment. This young man is moving. He's trying to understand his own history, and he's got this. I'm going to use a technical term here, metafictional moment, where this young man is talking to his biological father, but his biological father has died. But he's having this kind of conversation, and it's just a really moving kind of a moment, and you understand his grief, his loss, and that the younger man was never acknowledged to be the son of the man who has died. And again, that empathy, that understanding, that sense of how the way we treat each other is important to how the people we're treating see themselves.
Right.
Right. So that's to me where the depth of literature and contemporary writing comes from. It's where it comes in, it's where it enters into being, but it's also how we connect. And that's you put that into a book, you give that book to a reader, and the reader reads that book and goes and has that moment.
I think that what's interesting with that sort of sensibility, and perhaps that is the basic sensibility of the Cheuse Center related to seeing ourselves and how others see us, and then looking out and thinking, well, maybe I need to think about how I'm seeing you, and therefore how that influences how you see yourself. And I think that's at the core, perhaps, of um, James Baldwin, and how he sort of said that the way you define me tells me more about who you are than it tells me about who I am. And so if you can stop thinking about me in that way, how will that change how you think about yourself? And he says it, of course, in much more racial terms. And I bristled a little bit with that Mengistu statement that the narrator in All Our Names talks about. And that's an incredible book about that you learned it from, the white Europeans, how to kill. I think that coming from a culture like I do, I grew up in Mumbai and in Bombay, was what we called it. Growing up, the name changed, like names change, in the 90s for different reasons. And related, you have a recent situation where the name of the Gulf of Mexico has changed to the Gulf of America. So what seems very surprising here is something that we have experienced many times. Everything changed. The streets changed their names. This sort of going back to your roots, who owns what, where is power? Let's reorganize the names of streets so that rename them in places, because that tells you who's in power now and what they mean and who they are. And so I bristle at it because in some ways I feel like we are very common in our both in our atavism and our and in our ability to love and be fully human and good. And so I think it's a question of how do you see yourself again, growing up, many of us in Bombay and in the world felt like though there was the worst of humanity out there, like for example, the genocides in Rwanda or in the Holocaust in Europe, and you say, well, you know, that is all of us. You can point fingers at one group of people, but actually that is in us. We all have that capacity, and we can train and develop ourselves. And that's where agency and free will and all of these other concepts, and it's very philosophical, but how do you become a society? How do you create the checks and balances so you become something that tempers our worst nature? And you have that ability, and to be able to like live in India and grow up and see the rioting. And if you want to start blaming other people for killing your neighbor, then that doesn't make any sense to me, because you are living in, there is, that neighbor is not, that blame is nowhere near you. It's not 70 years of history, and not right sitting there when you kill your neighbor. You're doing it yourself. You're doing it. It's you. And so there may be entrenched power dynamics that you can blame the British for, but at the end of the day, history has its lessons, and we have to bring those lessons home, and we have to be able to engage with them, and to 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 change.
Well, and I think thank you for both of you for that. I think that gets us to we've really covered kind of the literal and practical applications of the mission of what happens at Mason, what's been happening at Mason. But I think in this moment, and pivoting from what you both are talking about, is a more philosophical issue, which is there's a reason that the discovery that occurs, the enlightenment that occurs, the confrontation, whether it's with self or others, that the best literature does across cultures and time, is frightening. And there's a reason. If art didn't matter, we wouldn't see such a concerted effort. The fact that we're still talking about banning and burning books, the fact that there's a very aggressive war underway right now, shutting down institutions and mechanisms for funding. This is proof that there is a fight, that we need to be engaged in the fight, and we need to find meaningful ways to help people understand why art matters, why it needs support, and how it does help the very things we're talking about: build empathy, uh, curate curiosity, connect communities. I think there are very powerful forces that want nothing more than apathy and closed communities. So the work that you both are doing, and that all of us, as advocates for education and the humanities, is this almost societal work to rage against apathy, to rage against ignorance and closed-mindedness. I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on those levels about kind of the more fundamental human mission of what you're both engaged in.
I do, and I would approach it somewhat anecdotally. Flannery O'Connor, Southern writer, very Catholic, was offered the chance to meet James Baldwin in Georgia. He would come and visit with her. And she had a disease her father had, and she was not traveling. And somebody was trying to broker this, and she said, "That's not going to work in Georgia. If we could see each other in New York, that'd be fine, but not in Georgia." Place matters. Times matter, but I think place may matter as much or more than time. I want to talk about the creative writing program at Mason because, for example, I don't want to leave the faculty development out of what's happened in the creative writing program there. We, those of us who were there at the time when I was directing the program, because normal sort of attrition, nothing nefarious, but normal sort of attrition. People get offers, they move on. Um, we had opportunity to bring in international writers, and we did so consciously because we felt like that was a thing to do. And I think it made a difference in the program. Um, I think that the people who are there now are writing and publishing and teaching in the way that they do best and to the best of their abilities and right up there, bar none. But I think also that the people who were there before did well as well. But I think that has changed all of the creative writing programs and the efforts of the creative writing programs across the country and around the world. In other words, I think we have seen a shift in publishing and a shift in writing and a shift of writers engaging with the world. And this has opened up opportunities. So I have to put those two thoughts together. I think that place matters, but time does somewhat. But if you relocate, if you have the opportunity to engage with other places, if you have the opportunity, it goes back to Alan's whole point: send the writers abroad.
Yeah, and I think that related to that is this sense of community. I mean, you asked that question sort of halfway through, and we didn't really answer it, I think, at the time. But this sort of a space, space, place matter for sure, but small is beautiful, right? The idea that make the people around you, bring them together, bring everybody who's here. Sometimes we think, oh, we want to do this, we want to be famous, we want to do that. The point is to bring the community together that is immediately around you. Nurture that community. Notice that there are other people like yourself, Sean, who are doing great things, and that we can't do what you're doing in, the space you're doing it, and that, but we'd love you to be part of our circle. And so there's so many remarkable organizations in the region that are doing phenomenal work, and we're all kind of collaborating with each other. And so, for example, when we start a new project, we always have sometimes 10, sometimes 24 hosts that come from across the region that come together regularly to create the program from the ground up, so that you're developing that, both the knowledge, which I wouldn't know anything about Ukrainian writing to start with, but then with the Ukrainian poets and writers and translators and presses and embassy and all of these other places coming together from the ground up, you can build a program and then keep feeding the program, because you don't want to do one thing and then just forget about that group of people. You want to keep restoring the connections. And one of the things about literary organizations, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that they're based on a pretty informal infrastructure. Whatever can come our way, etc. To establish them, you really need universities. You need large institutions that can create the space and keep the historic knowledge and build on it and archive it. And so this sense that you can just go off on your own and build something great and get tons of funding. Sure, some people do it, they do it, but I think that returning to education as a place, I think, where we can say, well, there's a reason why education matters, why educational institutions are so important for the public good, that we are all in public service, and this network and constellation of other organizations need to be nurtured by these institutions, as well as then, the entrepreneurial spirit and individual funding and all of those things. But that we're kind of enmeshed in this phenomenal kind of democratic process. And I think that's where India and America is so similar, is that there is an established institutional presence as well as philanthropic presence. And philanthropy and the meaning of philanthropy and being not just a citizen but a giving citizen, that whole idea that we are all, no matter how much we earn, giving back to that civic and public space is integral to what a democratic nation does. And it's it seems informal, but it's actually critical to surviving, for a democracy to survive.
I think what you're talking about really is you're elucidating the many complex layers of any operation to continue successfully relies on a lot of moving parts, a lot of circumstances, a lot of individuals, and a collective mission that they exist compatibly. But what I think one of the beautiful effects of that, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, is this is building better students, it's building better citizens, it's certainly building better writers. And I know Bill has spoken about this, and I praised him for it earlier. The reality is most MFA students, most creatives won't make a living through their art, and rather than run away from that or be afraid of that or avoid that, embrace it and say, how can you find ways to nurture your art while you're paying bills, and perhaps find ways that you can pay bills that are meaningful to you or meaningful to the community. I think the more conversations we have, the more programming we have, the more positive collaborations we have, all of these possibilities emerge. And I think rather than scaring students or leaving them to think it's a zero-sum game where, one person's going to make it and the rest of you won't be writers. What a terrible attitude, instead of assuming you all can be writers. And perhaps it's a good thing that you won't have to make your living at that. There are other ways, and the people you're meeting here, or the people you're reading about, or the opportunities you're seeing, this is all feeding that. And again, I think Mason was way ahead of what other programs should be copying, which is getting students more civically engaged, because that world is going to be there when they do leave the university.
Yeah, it comes back to that idea of the complete life. Like, most of us will not necessarily have the opportunity to get an advance. I have a novel coming out, and there's not going to be that kind of advance, as you're saying. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a life. We're living a life that has all of these different aspects to it, and that we should be the assumption that we should be monetarily benefited from the life is an assumption that has never been true in history,
Right.
right? Like, this life, you have to work, you have to do things that you don't want to do sometimes, like the dishes. The whole of life is kind of that, as you're saying, and I think that's really intuitive, Sean, but also really important for us to understand that there's this long runway. The runway is from birth to death, in a way. Like, it's a long runway, and we're we're not all going to have that big book. We're not all going to have even the small book. And so how do we live that nurture? How do we nurture our own creativity, but also not necessarily look at it as a reward at the end of the day, that is in the publication or in something else? And it's hard not to want that. It's hard not to feel like, oh, but that is what I've spent my entire life doing, and therefore shouldn't that be the upside of it? And for most of us, that's not the case. And so a life in public service, in philanthropy, even if it's small amounts of it, is not a celebrity life where you're making, tons of money selling products on Instagram or whatever it is, but it's um it's a very useful life in itself.
Bill, you want to add in on that? I know you've got some thoughts.
Well, one of the things that I'm thinking about is a lot of writers, young writers these days, are writing out of the combined thing of their life. Like maybe, like you were saying, Sean, that they can't support themselves initially just off the writing, so they do teaching or they do, you know, something else. They have a day job other than the writing. And I see a lot of young people writing stories that are informed by that thing that they do. And I think that makes good writing. I think one of the keys is, of course, that you know you've got to have things happening in the writing. I was reading the Best American Short Stories for 24 not long ago, and Heidi Pitlor, you know, get the series editor got all the usual couple of dozen things that she wanted Lauren Groff, the series the editor for this episode, to read, and she sent them off to her, and Groff read through them, and she sent Pitlor an email and said, these are really, really well written. They're very polished. They're obviously great. They appeared in all these wonderful outlets. But have you got any stories in which something actually happens? That's of course one of the issues that we can get into when we get too close to craft and drag the writing into the craft room and out of the life room. And I think Groff was, and this is no secret. If you read the introductory material to the Best American Short Stories of 2024, you'll find this anecdote. It's in there. But that's what happens. Like I said, when you get out of the life room and into the craft room, and you drag your experiences into your writing from the craft room. But I think that's good for writing if you're in the life room and you're putting that into your writing. And I think that's basically one of the benefits that's happening. And again, I think this is one of the benefits of having a core of writers and a creative writing program who come from diverse backgrounds and bring that into the craft room that's happening. That's what George Mason does. But I also think it's one of the benefits of having something like the Cheuse Center that interjects into that environment, broadening experiences of a wide variety in terms of nature and that kind of thing. And before we leave, I want to make sure that people know that the occasion for this conversation is the fact that the Cheuse Center has been around for about 10 years almost, and we are launching a series of events to celebrate those 10 years. And I hope that your listeners and viewers will look for those events and will come out and participate in them. Because I think they'd find them fun. We do try to have fun. We also try to illuminate people's experiences while we're even having fun. You know, so I think it's. I appreciate your having us on, but I think that also we don't want to sound so serious and so somber that people don't think we have fun. I kind of worked that in there about 3 or 4 times now, right?
You need to unmute yourself, Leeya.
We from the very beginning, Chris and I have laughed hysterically and said we have to have Cheuse snacks. So, um, so yeah, we have a lot of fun and we laugh a lot. And yeah, we're taking ourselves very seriously. Um, Maybe that should be a theme for next year. Don't take yourself so seriously.
Well, and I think I concur. I think what we're talking about is you know is heavy in terms of it's laden with meaning and history, and we want to properly showcase and celebrate the remarkable mission and success of the Cheuse Center. But yes, it goes without saying that the invite is now open for people to discover not only the mission and how they can support it and spread the word, but show up, especially if you're local, for some of these amazing opportunities. I will make sure in the summary and the write-up, I'll include myriad links and avenues of exploration. But if you both want to quickly shout out some things that you're looking forward to in the months ahead, that would certainly be welcome.
I'm going to defer to Leeya. She's got this off all on the top of her head.
Well, we're going to be at the Middle East Institute in early June with Azar Nafisi, and we will be talking about her life of letters. We're going to be at the Annapolis Book Festival in early May, and we'll have a bunch of incredible writers, including Joanne Leadham Ackerman and Catherine E. Young, talking about activism and writing. And we will be celebrating the launch of Sam Ashworth's book alongside Carol Mitchell at the Arts Club, May 15th. We'd love people to come to that. So we have a lot going on, and we'll be at the Lithuanian Embassy at some point, May 13th, I think. And so yeah. But that's just events because a lot of our work is not just events. So it's there's a lot of other things going on. So if you'd like to get involved, send me an email.
Right. And we are planning, just before we say goodbye, we are planning events that celebrate, going through the fall and through next spring, not only the normal kind of events, but hallmarking the Cheuse Center and its work and its 10th year of doing what it does.
Yeah, we raise money for writers basically and programs. All the money that we raise goes directly to fellows and writers and to people from all over the world who come into our programs. So we are very much hoping that we'll have a really great fundraising year, and every dollar goes a long way. Um, to our programs, which is pretty unusual because George Mason supports the staff, and so everything goes to programs.
Well, I mean that's an ideal note to end on, because one of my mantras is to resist apathy or despair, support art, support creativity, support good causes. The Cheuse Center, I could not think of a better, more urgent need. I think anyone listening right now, you'll feel better on a lot of levels, and you'll understand the work that these two do. If anything, although I think we've done a decent job of really getting a handle on both the history and the mission. There's so much, and there's already a amazing archive of events and documents and history. Get involved, support it, support art in general. Don't give in to feeling like you can't make a difference, because you can. And as Bill said, it is fun, and it's fun to be involved and connected. So challenge yourself to make a difference. Along those lines, I'm so grateful for both of you being here. I do feel like we barely scratched the surface. So if you'll promise that you'll come back and we can do a regular check-in on programming and milestones, and take a moment to celebrate the great work that you both do, I would certainly welcome that.
I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. I'd love to. And I leave you with Mary Oliver, who said, "Don't hesitate," in her poem, "to feel joy."
Indeed. Well, Leeya, Bill, thanks for being here. I adore the work you do, and certainly will do my part to promote and support it. But we'll see you again soon. Everybody, I'll put links everywhere. Check out the Cheuse Center, support them, be safe, be well, and celebrate and promote creativity. We'll see you soon on Some Things Considered. Cheers.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.